Ma'am, the contractor's waiting area is down the hall. Second left, past the comms bay. You'll see the sign. That was Captain Reeves, logistics. 28 years old, 2 deployments to places where nothing much happened. And he said it the way a person says it when they are completely certain they are correct, helpful, efficient. Already moving on to the next item on his clipboard before she had time to answer. I was standing near the back wall of Joint Command Post Bravo with a press credential hanging around my neck and a notebook in my hand, doing what correspondents do in rooms like that, watching who talks to whom, tracking the seating order, learning the hierarchy before the briefing began. I had been in enough of those rooms over 19 years to know that the seating order tells you everything. The man at the center table controls the meeting. The men on the outer ring are there to listen. And the people Reeves directed toward the contractor's hall were not supposed to be in the room at all. The woman he had just redirected wore no rank on her collar. That was the detail I noticed first. Plain coyote brown jacket, sleeves rolled, no insignia, no name tape visible at the angle I was standing. She carried a single manila folder tucked under one arm and a ceramic coffee cup in the other hand, the kind you bring from home, not the kind you pick up off a forward post serving table. She looked like she had been awake for 20 hours, which in a place like that was neither remarkable nor particularly concerning. She looked, in short, exactly like someone who had taken a wrong turn. She did not correct him. She looked at him for a moment, not annoyed, not flustered, a look you might give a door that swings the wrong way, and then she stepped through the briefing room entrance and found a chair at the far left of the outer ring, set her coffee on the floor beside it, opened her folder, and began to read. Reeves watched her for a second. He made a small decision. She was clearly harmless. He went back to his clipboard. I wrote nothing yet. I had learned over the years that the moments worth writing were not always the loud ones. The room filled in over the next 10 minutes. 18 officers in total, ranging from captains to a pair of lieutenant colonels seated at the center table. General Harwick came in last, the way generals do, and took his chair without ceremony. He had a reputation in theater as a man who ran tight briefings, the kind where you said what needed to be said and left out everything that didn't. He glanced around the room once, the professional sweep of a man cataloguing who was present and who was not, and he opened his own folder. The briefing started. Staff officers cycled through their slides. Force disposition along the eastern corridor. Logistics constraints at Waypoint Delta. Signals intelligence from the preceding 48 hours. The room had the particular focused quiet of people who understood that the decisions made in the next 90 minutes would move things on the ground. The woman in the outer ring listened. She did not take notes. She turned one page in her folder, read it, turned another. When the signals officer made a small error on a grid coordinate, he transposed 2 numbers, the kind of mistake that matters in practice. She set her folder in her lap and looked at him with an expression that was not impatient. Exactly. More like a teacher letting a student find his own error. The signals officer found it on his own, corrected it without prompting and moved on. She looked back at her folder. I wrote that down. 40 minutes into the briefing, the commanding general of the task force was introduced by name. The chair at the head of the center table was still occupied by the colonel who had been running the slides, a Colonel Paxton, task force operations chief, and I remember thinking that was odd, that the task force commander would be named but not yet present. General Harwick set down his pen. Before we go to questions, Harwick said, I want to make sure everyone in this room has met the incoming task force commander. Colonel Paxton looked at the general. Then he looked around the room, toward the door, the way men look when they expect someone to walk through it. Harwick looked at the outer ring, at the woman in the coyote brown jacket. Colonel Vasquez, he said, if you want to say a word before we go to questions. I do not think I have ever watched a room turn so completely and so quietly. There was no crash, no sudden shift in posture, no collective intake of breath loud enough to name. It was more precise than that. It was a room of 18 military officers arriving, one by one, at the same understanding, each face making the journey in its own time, the two lieutenant colonels at the center table, the signals officer who had transposed his grid coordinates, Captain Reeves, who was standing near the entrance with his clipboard and had not moved since the briefing started. Colonel Vasquez stood from the outer ring chair. She was not tall. She had the kind of build that suggested a person who had spent years carrying weight over hard ground, compact and settled. She buttoned one button on her jacket as she stood, unhurried, and for the first time I could see the rank on her collar, full bird colonel. The patch on her right shoulder was a unit I recognized from 2 previous postings in theater, the kind that did not announce itself in press releases. She picked up her coffee cup from the floor, took a short sip, and looked at the room. "We'll keep this brief," she said. "Most of what needs saying is in the folder General Harwick gave you last week. I've read your assessments. They're solid. I have 3 adjustments to the Eastern Corridor plan, and 1 question about the signals timing that I'd like to work through before we close." She set her coffee down on the center table, at the chair that was apparently hers, the chair that had been sitting empty at the head of it, the one Colonel Paxton had not occupied, opened her folder to a tabbed page, and looked up. "Captain," she said. Reeves, near the door, came to attention before he understood he was doing it. It was the kind of response that lives below conscious thought, wired by years of training into the body before the mind catches up. Said. She did not address the error. She did not correct his form of address, either, though she was a colonel and the address was wrong and every officer in the room knew it. She looked at him the way she had looked at him in the corridor when he sent her toward the contractor's hall, the door that swings the wrong way, and then she looked at the center table and said, "I want the signals officer to walk me through the timing on the grid package before the room breaks. Everyone else, 3 minutes." The briefing resumed. I stopped taking the kind of notes that describe what happens in a room and started taking the kind that try to describe what a room feels like. What it felt like was this: the weight of command is not evenly distributed. Some people carry it like a coat they put on in the morning and take off at night. Others carry it the way the ground carries a building. It is simply what they are designed to do. You do not notice it until something puts pressure on the structure, and then you understand that the structure was always there and that you were standing on it without knowing. She ran the last 30 minutes of that briefing. She asked 3 questions about the Eastern Corridor timing that caused Colonel Paxton to revise his position twice, and the signals officer to revise his once. She did not raise her voice. She did not acknowledge that she had spent the first 40 minutes of the meeting being treated as a lost contractor. She moved through the questions with the focused efficiency of a person who had been in this particular kind of room too many times to be interested in anything but the work. When the briefing closed, General Harwick stood, thanked the assembled officers, and gave Colonel Vasquez a short nod, the nod of a man who had already briefed her separately, who was not surprised by anything he had seen, and who had expected every outcome. The room began to clear. Captain Reeves approached her near the center table. He was carrying his clipboard, but he was not looking at it. He came to attention and rendered a clean salute, the kind that says more than the words that follow it. She returned it without theater. Whatever he said after that, I did not hear. I was across the room writing, and my notes only say that the conversation lasted 45 seconds and that he left the room looking like a man who had learned something permanent. I have been in a great many command briefings. I have watched generals run rooms, and I have watched generals lose rooms, and I have watched colonels do both while trying to look like neither. What I remember about that morning in Joint Command Post Bravo is not the slides, not the grid corrections, not the Eastern Corridor adjustment that turned out to matter considerably 2 weeks later when the corridor held when no one expected it to. What I remember is a woman who sat in the outer ring, read her folder, and waited for the room to be ready to understand what it was already dealing with. She gave it all the time it needed. The task force ran for 7 months after that morning. In my experience, that patience, the specific discipline of not explaining yourself to a room that hasn't earned the explanation yet, is rarer than any qualification on any record. It is the thing command actually requires, and the thing almost no one who wants it has. She had it without wanting anything for it at all.